Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us from today. My name's Sarah and I'm a Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to a Microsoft Reactor Sydney livestream event. Today I would like to welcome back Rebecca Jackson, who you can see on the screen here. Hi, Rebecca. Rebecca is a digital workplace and employee experience practitioner and Microsoft MVP. Rebecca is fascinated by what makes people and organizations tick. She's a specialist in the digital workplace, employee experience, and change management. She has been working with intranets, online communities, internal communications, and the digital workplace since 2009 and prides herself on being able to bring businesses' needs to the forefront of delivering technology. Today, she will be showing you how to personalize PowerPoint with your own sketches. So just a bit of housekeeping, you'll see in the comment section I've entered the check-in link with the event code 14637. So please check in where you'll find additional resources from today's session that Rebecca has kindly provided you in. We will be speaking for about 40 to 45 minutes with 10 minutes for questions at the end. However, do send us your questions throughout and we'll try and answer as many as possible. And at the conclusion, we'll also share with you a link to our feedback survey with the same event code 14637. If there's anything throughout today's session that you missed or you'd like to reference back, you can do so on our YouTube channel. So we'll provide that link as well. Straight after today's live stream, there will be the on-demand version available on our YouTube channel. But for now, I'd like to hand the floor over to Rebecca to begin. So thank you so much, Rebecca, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to everyone who's joined us live or later on demand. Just to start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this event is hosted and the traditional custodians of the lands where our participants are located. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and future. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'm here to talk to you about how you can personalize your PowerPoint with your own sketches. So hopefully you've joined with some expectation that you're going to learn a little bit about sketching and a little bit about some PowerPoint tricks, because that is exactly what we're here to do. So Sarah gave me a bit of an intro. I am Digital Workplace and Employee Experience Practitioner, a Microsoft MVP in the Office Apps and Services category. 24/7 nerd by day, nerd by night, and a doodler, sketchnoter, and graphic facilitator. So I'm excited about this presentation because it brings together a couple of things which I really love, which is PowerPoint and Microsoft stuff and sketching. If you're following along and you want to share things, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Rebecca JLJ, and some hashtags that you might want to use: hashtag PowerPoint, hashtag Microsoft Reactor, and hashtag Sketchnotes. So before we get into the content, it's not necessarily a workshop, but you can certainly follow along, and I encourage you to sketch along. So if you've kind of preempted and you've got a tablet handy, or even if you've just got a paper and pen handy, even though this is kind of a digital focus, grab those, and I encourage you to sketch along while I'm talking to you at the moment. So grab a tablet or some paper, grab a stylus and a pen, and as I'm talking, just make short notes like you normally would. And then when it comes to bits where there's some visual stuff coming up, copy them. Just copy them and make it part of your practice. I'm going to show you a few things, like some methods that you might want to emulate. And then also optional, share it on social media if you want to tag me and tag Microsoft when you do that. Totally up to you. So to start with, as a premise, everyone can draw, and this is the big thing for me, being a sketchnoter and doing graphic facilitation. It is really about presenting things in a simple way, and it doesn't need to be overly complicated. And just everyone says they can't draw, but 100% at some point in your life you sat down with a pencil and a crayon, probably when you were a kid if you haven't done it recently, and you drew things that people could recognize and you could recognize. So you don't necessarily have to be a Michelangelo to draw and to get value out of that process. It's about communicating ideas, not about art. So go to a fine art school if you want to be a fine artist, but everyone can pick up a pen. You're able to kind of show your ideas in a really simple way. So sometimes text is great, but a visual is so much more impactful. When it comes to using it in presentations, it's a great way to create some consistency in your presentation as well. I'm going to talk about that further on in the presentation. You can literally illustrate anything that you want to illustrate. And again, if you think you can't, I'm telling you you can. I'm going to show you how you can do that. And it's all about just honing your skills. So drawing is a skill, just like anything else, and you can improve it, and you can improve it by practice. And I do that myself. So many years ago, when I was introduced to sketchnoting, I've got books and books filled with things that I'm showing you today that I've practiced myself. And so that repetition, building that muscle memory, getting things into your visual memory is incredibly important. I encourage you to doodle in the margins. So just like I asked you now, if you've listened to me and you've picked up a pen or a tablet and you're kind of making some notes as we go along, even just doodling. So, some swirls or squares, everyone's got like little different styles that they like to do. Just doing that as a practice when you're listening to a presentation can be really helpful to build up that just that freedom of the hand and wanting to do that activity. And practicing the basics. So repeating the processes, looking for things you don't know how to draw, and practicing it will build up that visual vocabulary in your brain. Very quickly on tools. So for this presentation today, we're talking about PowerPoint, and the best way to get your drawings, or the easiest way to get your drawings into PowerPoint, is to use a tablet or a stylus, and that's predominantly what I'm going to be talking about. But when it comes to building up drawing practice, you can use anything that you like. But in this context today, I encourage you to start simple. So I love technology. I like to go out and buy the new shiny things, but it can be expensive, like frankly. So I encourage you to just start with what you have at hand. And what you might find is doing it, drawing with a mouse and drawing with your finger is not necessarily going to be the quality that you might expect, but it's going to be fine and probably still usable. And I think arguably sometimes more accessible when you're presenting it to people, because they feel more of a connection with something that's a little bit rougher. But anyway, start with what you've got already. And then you probably know someone who's got some tools. Borrow one of theirs, have a play with it, see if you like it, because investing in a tablet or any sort of device like that it's a big monetary investment. So make sure that you have a play with someone else's and see the different ways and the different applications and things, and how it works, and if you like it, if it's for you. So 100% test before you invest. Like, you can go into a retail store and play with the devices. Absolutely do that before you throw down your money to invest in a new piece of technology. So moving on to sketching, I'm going to start with some basics of sketching. And these are things that you can practice to build that visual vocabulary. So visual vocabulary is just like a verbal vocabulary. When we're in school, often where we memorize words and we repeat things to spell them and all of that sort of stuff, visual vocabulary is the same thing. It's building up and getting into your memory different visuals that you can use in your presentations, and more broadly, if you decide that you want to explore sketching in other applications. So basic elements are, any image, any picture, you can break it down into some really, really basic elements. And this is probably going to seem overly simplistic, but a circle, a square, a triangle, a line, and a dot is kind of all you really need to be able to build a picture. And I've got an example here for you. So if I was to draw this for you, I would hope you would recognize it as a cat. But it's super simple, right? There was a circle. If I step back, you've got a circle, you've got two triangles, you've got two dots, a couple of curved lines, and a bunch of lines. That's as simple as that is. And you can, again, repeat it, practice it, draw the circle in different ways, draw the dots in different ways to get different looks for your cat. And then similarly, a house, really simple example, just a square. Stepping back again, we've got a square, we've got a triangle and a couple of squares, and that makes a house for you. So if you're thinking about it, about your visuals more complexly than that, you're kind of going to set yourself up for failure, because keep it super, super simple. Arrows and containers are other really important elements just broadly with sketching. So different types of arrows, and I've Again, I've got books where I've practiced all different types of arrows and things like that. Looked up on the internet for visual guides and copied them to practice and kind of get my own frame of reference. And containers are great as well. I'm going to talk about these elements a little bit more later in the presentation, but you've got lots of different options there. And again, repetition and practice. If you're not sure what to do, use the internet and look up and find things. Symbols are really, really, really helpful. So I think of symbols like icons and emoji. And often if I'm doing a piece of work, I will, be like, I can't think about how to visualize that concept or this particular thing. And I'll just see I'll Google the word and emoji or icon and see what comes up. So it's like, just really, really simple shapes that you'll probably be really familiar with drawing, but perhaps not necessarily put into, different combinations. Like all of these things are things that are really simple for you to do. And if you're not already drawing them, definitely suggest, just on a bit of paper, give them a crack and see how it turns out. Lettering is really important as well. So lettering can start simple, but then you can build it up. And again, it's a practice thing. So building up from simple lettering to block lettering. And here you can see like the letter A, draw a letter A, then double up the lines and fill in the ends. And you have yourself a letter A in a more bolder format. Figures is where it starts to, I think people get kind of nervous about, like, I can only draw stick figures. Well, if you can draw stick figures, then you can add cool things to your presentations. Stick figures are really, really useful. And you can pimp up your stick figure a little bit by turning him into a little box dude, or having a round person with little circles at the ends for hands. Super simple way to do it. This is one that I'm kind of a fan of, is little star people, kind of like blobs. And I find those personally useful to draw. When you've got stick figures, you can kind of give them elbows and things and make them do different actions, which is really, really useful. But you've got options there. And so if you're like, my stick figures aren't great, well, step them up and try some different options. And you might find one that is just easier for you, works better for you to draw. Now this is a fun one where I'm going to jump into I've got my Surface Pro down here in front of me. I'm actually going to hand draw this one because I didn't like how it turned out when I stepped it up previously. So this exercise is really useful to get a hang of facial expressions. And I actually play with this all the time when I can't figure out a particular expression, or I just want different expressions on a face. Find it really useful. So you've got a grid, and in the grid you can see you've got a line, upwards curly line, a downwards curly line. So that's different mouths, and this here is different eyes or eyebrows, depending on how you draw it. So you've got two lines, two downward lines, two kind of upwards lines. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to fill in the gaps, which is super fun. So in the first one, I'm going to draw my two lines. And I'm just checking that it's showing up, which is great. Thank you, technology gods. And then I'm going to draw the line. Hopefully you're seeing we've got a bit of a face forming there. I'll give him some eyes, although I could leave the lines as eyes if I wanted. I can give my person a nose, and I can put a circle around him if I want to. And then it's kind of a rinse and repeat. And this is like, I mean, it's a fun exercise. If you've got kids, do it with your kids. They'll think it's awesome. Making these different faces. And you can see kind of the subtle nuances in the expressions. Like that. I'm going to move on to my next column, which is like my downward. I'm going to give it that, and I'm going to do that, and that. So it's kind of like an angry man. They're all looking very manly at the moment, so I think I'm going to change things up in this one with these and a big smile. And I'm just going to do that. I love this exercise. Pretty much just entertaining myself now. And I'm going to finish these up, so you can see what they all look like. You can change, I like to play with different variations of the shape of the face. Can be really, really fun. And if this is something you're exploring as using ongoing for presentations, you might want to set yourself up and have a little character. So you might find a face shape that you like that works differently in different situations, or that you just want to stick to. And then that's what you want to go with. there we go. You can tell I'm just enjoying myself right here. So that's just great practice for getting different combinations of facial expressions. So moving on to the actually using them in presentations. So that was kind of a little bit of a primer, a little bit of sketch basics for you to build that visual vocabulary. And now I'm going to talk about how you can actually include them in your presentations. So first off is text. So you could use them for your headings. Now, when you're using them for headings, that's a little bit of effort. So I would recommend maybe using them for your main headings, but you could do them for every single heading if you wanted to. You just got to think about that when you're doing it for every heading. There's a bit of work that goes into that and whether you want to put that work in. Accessibility is also something you need to think about when you're using text for headings, and I talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So you've got headings, and then you've got call-outs. So if you're doing a presentation, you might have a point that you want to emphasize, and previously you might have just put a box with some text, right? Well, why not jazz it up a little bit and put a box with some handwritten text? Just gives it that little bit of a personal feel. Figures and faces, and we just covered that in kind of the sketch basics. So now that we know how to draw our stick people and we can draw some faces, we can use them to add emphasis to our presentations. So you've got a slide that's about something that you want to celebrate, and you can just put a little person up there who's doing a little hip hip hooray. Or if you want to you're doing something, maybe it's a user experience design piece and you want to show a user journey, and you can draw your little faces of your user journey instead of getting stock photos and things like that. And stock photos are great and I have a use for them, definitely, but having something that's hand-drawn is a little more personal. And also sometimes when we're doing presentations, we don't want people necessarily to identify with a particular individual or a stock photo. Having an illustrated character can kind of make people focus more on the character as opposed to the person who's in the photo that we're using. Diagrams, I think, is a really clear one and probably a really great place to start. If you use a lot of diagrams in your presentations, sketching those diagrams can be really impactful. And something to think about is, I feel like we sometimes get caught up in when we're doing a diagram, it needs to be perfect and tuned and beautiful, particularly in a work context. But actually, what I find is that people relate better to something that's a little bit more hand-drawn. And that's why if you do wireframes and things like that for your work, often we'll use a tool that has like sketchy lines for the wireframes, because presenting someone something that looks a little bit unfinished is a bit more accessible, and also they're not looking at that and going, oh, that's the absolute final thing. So some things to think about in using diagrams in a sketchy way as opposed to Visio or other tools like that. Hot tip though, Visio has some really cool, and I think PowerPoint as well, has some really cool sketchy line options for your diagram. So if you don't want to hand draw it, you've got some options there to look at when you're doing diagrams. Arrows, frames, and circles are super, super handy. And so, sometimes we'll have something on a slide and we want to point to it or we want to emphasize it, and we'll use a box or we'll use like a preset arrow from PowerPoint. Well, why not just hand draw it? It looks really funky, and again, it kind of just adds a little bit of flair. And if you're using it consistently throughout your presentation, then people can see there's a bit of a style going on. Now, images and icons is where your visual vocabulary is going to come in real handy. And it's good to build that vocabulary. And I mean, I find when I'm doing sketch notes or building presentations, there are things that are just super common. So I can't tell you how many light bulbs I've drawn, because I've drawn so many, and lightning bolts and things like that. So there are things that will just be immediately useful and immediately handy for you. And like I said, if you're not sure what to draw for a concept or to put with something, doing a search for images is, you can call it a cheat if you want, but it's helpful. So I say do it. And then you can get more complicated with them. So this particular drawing that I did here, I actually created that off of a stock image. So I'll often, if I'm not sure off the top of my head how to do something, I'll look for a stock image or maybe a combination of stock images, and I'll use that as a reference. And you can use it as a reference in a couple of different ways. So you could use it as a reference by just having it next to you on a different device or a different screen and trying to copy it, or just trace over it. Why not? You're basically wanting to convey a message, and nobody's going to be sitting there going, oh, well, they traced that image, so I'm not thinking it's particularly valid now. They're looking at the image and taking it for the context that you've got it in the presentation. So don't be scared to trace. It's a thing, people do it. So moving on to how to do these things in PowerPoint, and it has never been easier. So the draw features in PowerPoint are really great. I use them to create this presentation, so hopefully you noticed that. But I think for people who have maybe previously not used those tools because they've seemed hard to use, it's all awesome in PowerPoint, and also when you start to invest in a stylus or a tablet, they've never been better either. So what I really like about PowerPoint is that there's different ways you can get to it. So I'm not just limited to the desktop version when I'm using drawing features in PowerPoint, but they are not as extensible in the web as they are in the desktop version. So it's kind of like a word of caution, but you can still use the web version to do things, which is, I think, pretty spectacular. So you've got your draw menu in the web version, and you've got some basic options. Now, those options are more limited than in the desktop version in terms of the colors and things that you can get to, and the options that are available. So here you can see we've got we can adjust the thickness, but we're locked into colors, and also we're locked into the pen options that we've got available. So there's a couple of pens, and there's a highlighter. So in the web version, you don't have as much adjustability, but then when we get into the iPad version, you start to get heaps more stuff, which is pretty cool. So you've got the draw menu there, and the user experience is similar. So when you jump from one to the other, things are going to be in the same spot. You're just going to find that there might not be as many options depending on how you access it. But iPad and iOS has a lot of options and a lot of pen options. You can kind of see in the visual here, there is a lot more options visually available already. And if you have a keen eye, you might have noticed there are some interesting colors available as well, because I can do whatever I want, which is great. So I've got different options for my thickness. I've got heaps of different options for my color, and I love these funky sparkly colors and stuff like that. They can be really fun to work with, and you can have more colors in there as well. And you can see here that you can actually have a number of different pen options available, and even add more, which is great if you're someone who likes to use a lot of color, if you want to play around with different weights, so thicknesses of your pen and things like that, and have those all ready for you to go, the ones that you like. If you work for a company and you want them to be in brand colors, you can do that. Or if you just do your own stuff and you have a particular set of colors, your own personal brand colors that you can use those as well. So in the desktop version, you kind of get everything that's available. So the draw menu, again, is in the same place, and you've got all of the things. So you also have kind of that ink to text, ink to shape. Ink to shape can be really, really helpful if you draw a shape and you're like, oh, it's a bit wobbly, I don't want it wobbly. Ink to shape will kind of tidy up those edges for you. But I don't use it very often anymore, because I find that that kind of little bit of shakiness is actually a nice touch if my intent is to have something that's hand drawn. So you can see here, the menu doesn't look as long as it does in the iPad screenshot that I showed you, but you do have the ability to have more options, and then you've got kind of the preset colors, and you can choose your own colors as well. One of the extra exciting things about using drawing in PowerPoint is that you can animate them. And you might have noticed as I was going along, like when I was doing the little faces, I was doing that live, but all of the other drawings are part of the deck. And I've used the animation feature to actually play those back. And they play back in the order that I drew them, which is cool. It's kind of very natural. And they're, I think sometimes it's suitable. It adds a nice touch to introduce it in that way, but be a little bit cautious about, you don't necessarily want to animate absolutely everything, but it's in the same way that if you're using animation for other features in PowerPoint, it's a little bit less is more. So use it to create a little bit of impact. Don't use it all the time just because it's there and you think it looks funky, because people won't necessarily thank you for that. So in the animations menu, you select your drawing. So actually click on the drawing that you've created and then hit replay. And what usually happens is when you do a drawing, PowerPoint recognizes that it's happened as one drawing and it automatically kind of groups it together. That's not always the case, but that's usually the case. And you're able to just select that drawing and hit replay and it will replay for you. And it looks really, really nifty. So you just treat it like a normal animation, and it plays out and just is, I think it's a really nice touch that you can add to your presentations. Now, I've got some tips for when you're doing animations that are really helpful. And so that animation that I've just showed you, I'm going to replay it again so you can see actually what's happening. So if you didn't notice it before, I've just introduced the animation that I drew, or a version of the animation that I drew earlier. So the one I drew earlier was live. This is like, here's one I prepared earlier. And it's kind of come in weirdly, right? So what's happening is, because it takes a little bit of time to draw this out, not heaps of time, but PowerPoint's not recognized at all as one thing because of the different lines and that sort of stuff. The magic hasn't quite worked, which is fine. It's reasonably complicated in terms of what's going on here. But what it's doing is it's drawing all of those lines at the same time. And PowerPoint adds a default, I think it's 2 seconds when it's doing a replay animation on an object. And so if your drawing is big, 2 seconds can look really quick and kind of funky. If your drawing is small, like these lines here, that's like super painful and gross. So the things that you want to do are, first of all, check and adjust the duration. So if you're looking at it going, oh, it's too slow and it looks gross, just play with that duration in the animation pane, and you can adjust it down so it's quick. And sometimes quick looks even cooler, or sometimes you might want it to be longer because you actually want it to kind of play out while you're talking or something like that. The other one is that if you're finding it's doing what this slide did, and that all the bits are kind of just playing weirdly at the same time, you just need to group them and then it will play in order. So you group it together as an object, just like you do when you're gonna, if you've got some shapes and things, you want to group them together, that same kind of group feature, and they'll play in order just like that. So that is the same drawing, and all I did was I selected it all, I hit right click and then hit group, and now when I do the replay, it recognizes it and goes, I'm going to do all of these lines in the order that they were drawn, and it looks a lot tidier and a lot nicer, I think. So with all of that, we've got some really cool tools, some things that we can start practicing. We know how to get to it in PowerPoint, and then we can start playing with it. And you can do that with with your finger, or with a stylus, or with your mouse, whatever you want to use. But what I also want is for you to not forget about accessibility. So sometimes when we go to the effort of making our PowerPoint decks look amazing, they don't always look amazing for everyone. And the accessibility features that are available in the Office 365 toolset now are really amazing compared to what was available in any product 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So the tools are built in and they're in there for you. If you go back to that ribbon menu, you've got the review menu. And that gives you all of your options about spelling and grammar and things like that, but it's got check accessibility in there for you. So you can hit check accessibility, and it's going to look at your entire PowerPoint deck, so not just your drawings, and it's going to pick up the things that you need to improve in there. And so in the screenshot that I've got here, it's picked up that there's some alternative text missing and there's slide titles missing. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but in the context of this, the alternative text is the one that you want to think about, and definitely slide ordering as well. So with your alternative text, you want to make sure that if you've hand drawn your headings, that means that it's available for someone who can visually see and read that heading, but it's not available for someone who can't see it. So that might be someone who maybe doesn't speak English, and it might be someone who has a visual impairment and they're using a tool to access your presentation. So adding the alternative text for your headings, if you've used a drawn heading or an image as a heading, is really, really important. The other thing is, if you've just used an image because it's pretty and it's just decorative and it's not important or of value for people to necessarily know what that image is or what it says to understand your content, you can just mark it as decorative, and that's useful as well. So it means if somebody's accessing it, they know that they don't need to, they know they've not missed out on anything because it's marked as a decorative image. And the other one there is checking your reading order. So PowerPoint is, because it's kind of, that it's a bit of a, what would you call it? You've got like a layout there. Word is kind of in order because you've got sentences, but in PowerPoint, you've got this layout and it will do the order, I think usually in the order in which you add things. And sometimes that's not actually the order in which you intend people to read them. So your reading order is really useful to go, okay, I want them to read the heading first and I want to read this text first, and then I want them to know what this image is. Something to think about and to explore, and just hit that accessibility checker in one of your PowerPoints, and I think you'll probably be surprised about what's going on there and what you can improve to make it more accessible for people. So I'm going to kind of round off with some pick tricks. Some of these things are things that I've spoken about, but I want to make sure that you're hearing these messages, because what I hope is that you've kind of gotten through this point in the presentation and you're seeing that this is something that you can do. If I haven't yet convinced you, please listen to this hacks bit and still give it a go, right? So if you need an idea about something to draw, do a keyword search. I do it every day. I draw a lot, and when I'm trying to think of something to draw, sometimes I can't quite visualize it in my head because it's not in there, so I'll search for it. And this is not really a new thing. Artists have done this for a long time. Artists use reference images to create their artwork. So if an artist can do it, why can't you do it? Copy from those references. So again, like art students will go to art galleries and sit down with a sketchbook and sketch the masters, like actually sketch paintings and things like that. So again, if an art student can do it to create a piece of art, why can't you do it to create your PowerPoint deck? So copy from those references, and that copying can be tracing, or it can be copying and drawing. Absolutely no shame in tracing. So sometimes I'm just like, maybe I don't have the time, or maybe I don't think I can execute it as well as it's laid out in the picture, and I'll just trace it and then play with it and things like that. And that can be, I think, what I find is really useful about that one is that sometimes I've got a series of images for a presentation and they just don't look like they go together. They're different colors, they're different people, they're different shapes and things like that. But if I take all of those images and I just draw the outline of them, they look cohesive because they're all in the same style. That's kind of I think one of the big takeaways from the usefulness of this. So hints, just keep it really, really simple. Sometimes I get complicated and sometimes I keep it simple. And so many times I find that when I draw something that is simple, it's a lot more effective than a busy, complicated image or diagram, because it really hones in on that point. The point is not to present them with, the roof of the Sistine Chapel. The point is to just show them maybe a roof, and a roof is kind of really simple, can be simple. Balance out your elements. So there's a couple of reasons why I think this is important. The first one is because if you do it too much, it will lose its impact and effect. And also, it actually takes time to draw things. I think using drawings instead of pictures, sometimes I find I can draw it quicker than I can find an image that I think is suitable. But also, if you're drawing absolutely everything in your PowerPoint deck, that's a time investment that maybe you don't want to make. Get in touch with your own style. There are lots of, certainly in sketchnoting circles, there are artists who I really admire and I love their style, and I wish that was something that I could have. But a lot of people tell me that about my sketchnotes as well. It's a very subjective thing. So to get the most out of this and take advantage of it, just kind of be happy with the fact that you are an individual and you have your own style, and embrace that and kind of do your own thing. So thank you. I think that's wrapped up a little bit quicker than I thought it would. Maybe I spoke super, super fast. But I hope that some of you at least have got something in front of you, which is some drawings that you've done while you've been listening today. That would be absolutely fabulous. And if anything, that you've taken a bit of inspiration from this presentation to be able to improve your PowerPoint presentations. So if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Rebecca JLJ. And if you've drawn something today and you're comfortable with sharing it, please do tweet it out and use some hashtags and things like that. If you want to explore either sketching or Microsoft stuff or digital workplace more, I blog about that a bit. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, and the stuff that I draw is all over the Flickrs. So thank you again so much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm kind of looking over, I don't think any questions have come through, but I'm happy to take them or give you back some time in your day. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Rebecca. So as you just mentioned, we'll give everyone just another minute to ask any questions. And whilst we're waiting for that 1 minute, I'll just give you a quick reminder of our check-in page where Rebecca has kindly shared those links from today's presentation and some additional resources. You just enter that AKA link and then the event code 14637. Same applies to the survey. So that event code is 14637 as well. And I've just put in there the AKA link to our meetup page. So any upcoming events throughout the next couple of months, you'll be able to see on our meetup page there. And you can also access our Reactor Global page through there, but that's just the one for Sydney. And then the YouTube channel. So as mentioned, anything missed from today's session or something you'd like to reference back and redo with the demo that Rebecca did, you can do on our YouTube channel straight after today. So that link is in there for you. I think we'll just wrap it up there. No questions have come through, so you must have answered all questions throughout your presentation. So thank you so much to Rebecca for joining us again today to present. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Have a good rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you joined us from, and we'll see you next time for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.